Welcome, welcome. Sorry, I'm just still taking my last minute notes to make sure that I sound at least somewhat intelligent in this panel that is called Breaking the Mainstream, Getting Past Ashkenormativity and Secularism in Comics. It has words like Ashkenormativity, so I really need to sound smart. Wow, I'm glad to see you all here. The folks in the back, you're welcome to come forward if you'd like, or you're welcome to stay back there if you prefer that. But I think we can really kind of begin. Before I introduce the panelists, or rather have them introduce themselves, I want to introduce the topic that we're going to talk about a little bit, partly because it has some big words that have specific meanings that we should probably just dissect a little bit. So this topic came up. It was suggested by Miriam when we were thinking about the way that so much Jewish fiction out there, and this is true in comics and in movies, which is another world that I work in, much Jewish fiction, let me even back that up further, much popular fiction, when it features Jewish characters, features characters who are Ashkenazi. In many cases, those characters are secular. That is to say, they do not practice the religion of Judaism, though they identify or are identified as Jewish. And there's something about that seems worthy of discussion. I don't want to paint the conversation or taint the conversation too much before we let our panelists actually do the talking, which is my goal for today. So we want to talk a little bit about what it means for Jewish characters in popular fiction to appear in this way. And we specifically wanted to bring these panelists in for their unique perspectives on how that might change. And some of these panelists have written characters that buck this trend. Some of these panelists have written for very popular comic series, and so understand how hard it can be to buck a popular trend. And so my hope is that we'll be able to engage in a bit of an interesting conversation around this very broad but very important topic. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty, I would love for our panelists, I'd like for you all to introduce yourselves. I realize I should also introduce myself, and so I'll do that as well. In addition to the sort of general professional kind of brief resume, I would love for each of us to share a little bit of what makes us Jewishly different. However you define that, however you interpret that is up to you. Very briefly, my name is Arnon Shor. I'm a filmmaker, a screenwriter, comic book author. I've got a booth upstairs. And I became best known when I made a short film, and then after that a graphic novel about Jewish pirates in the 16th century Caribbean, which when I first told people about it, they thought it was a Mel Brooks style comedy. And that in itself is a whole thing worthy of unpacking in the context of this question of what we expect Jews to be in the fiction that we receive. And I'm very honored to be here with these folks. So maybe Daniel, you take the lead and we'll go down the line.
Thank you, Arnon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everybody, for attending this panel. My name is Daniel Lobel. I'm a comedian. I started 5 years ago turning my life into comic books. I was inspired by Harvey Pekar, who I had the great privilege of being friends with, and he encouraged me very much. I used to make comic books as a kid, and I really wanted to do it again, and he told me in 2 words, "You can." And supported me along the way, and here I am, and got nominated. I'm very honored to be honored, to be nominated for a Juice Award. And in terms of your question about Judaism, I'm mixed in that I'm part Ashken, not normative, and part Sephardic. One of my great grandfathers came from Istanbul. We were raised in a Moroccan synagogue in Long Beach, so most of the traditions that I keep are Sephardic. I am Sephardic, and that's how I practice Judaism. And I'm also not secular. Sephardic people aren't really broken up into Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. They're just more observant or less observant, and I fall into more observant. So when I talk about my life and I tell my stories autobiographically, you'll get some of that. It's not necessarily the focus of my books, but it's in there. And certainly if it's something that is part of your life, you'll see some of yourself in my work in that way.
Thank you, Danny. How about Emily?
Well, thanks. I'm so happy to know more about you.
Thank you for being happy.
I'm Emily Bowen Cohen, and my debut graphic novel is Two Tribes. The book is based on my real life experiences as a Jewish Native American. The lead character in Two Tribes is Mia, and she's 12, and she's Jewish, and like myself, a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation. And, well, briefly, Mia gets fed up with her Jewish mom and stepdad and decides to steal her bat mitzvah money and run away to her Native American family in Oklahoma. And while she goes on this journey, she learns how to reconcile her identity. And, well, what makes me different Jewishly is I married an Orthodox guy right out of college. And so my Judaism is very much informed by that. And also my early childhood in Okemah, Oklahoma, which is 30% people of my tribe. And like Mia, I would say digging deeply into both my Judaism and my Native heritage has really made a big difference in just my living my life as a whole person. Thank
Very
you for
happy
being
to
here.
know more about you.
Wow, everybody has such epic stories. Guys, my name's Josh Skye. It's really an honor to be here. I currently a writer for He-Man and Master Universe, and I've written for heavy metal, and I've worked for a bunch of the brands like Marvel and Disney, but I love indie stuff, and that's really where a lot of my heart is. I guess my relationship to Judaism is pretty unique. Also, I originally grew up in Maui, Hawaii, which is a very interesting take. Like to me, Judaism, like we'd show up to synagogue in surf shorts after the beach and stuff, and everyone would say things like shaloha, and we were just very, and the community was very mixed and extremely diverse because it's such a melting pot over there. So I've always had like a lot of, like in Judaism, there's just an incredible optimism, I think, to the faith. And growing up in Hawaii, this remote place, it was hard to get comic books, so I'd really have to like go on these journeys on the island, hunting them down like they were rare Pokemon or something like that. And but I was a complete science fiction and comic book addict. And the more I read about the history of comics and science fiction, the more I realized it was tied to Jewish history and Jewish creatives, editors, publishers, and all that stuff. So I kind of really fell in love with that tapestry of history. And I guess this also ultra like powerful neo-mythology that's come out of that, where you don't necessarily have to be of a faith, but you have to believe that there is good and evil in the world. And I became just still am very obsessed with it. So it's really great to be here, guys. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Carol, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Juice, for having me. I have to say, Miriam and everyone, it's been an amazing thing that you've done here. I'm so happy to be here. So yeah, my name is Carol Isaacs. I'm from London, England. I'm a cartoonist. Saying that in my English accent sounds like a terrible accusation, doesn't it? Admission. But that's what I do. And until recently, about 5 years ago, I was doing gag cartoons for the New Yorker, Private Eye, other papers and magazines. And then I was asked to contribute to a feminist comics anthology called The Strumpet. And their theme was origin stories. And up till then, I hadn't really considered my origins. Well, I kind of knew what they were, but I decided to do something on how I grew up in two worlds. I was born in England, but both my parents are from Iraq, from Baghdad. And essentially, we had one world inside our house that was very Iraqi Jewish, and another world at school where it was terribly, terribly British. I mean, upper class. I went to a very prominent school where not only was I in a tiny minority, but within that minority, I was another minority because all the other students, the other Jewish students, were all from Europe. And no one believed that a Jew could come from an Arab land. And so after I'd submitted this 3-page comic, I decided to do something more long form. And I came up with the idea of The Wolf of Baghdad, which is my debut graphic memoir, which tells the story of my family's experience in Iraq. I basically interviewed them all, and I just made a book from it. And it's also an animation. Actually, it's a motion comic, a new genre that I didn't know about until I did it. And it's like on screen. There's some short clips in the exhibition there. You'll see the story comes up panel by panel on the screen. And because it's essentially without dialogue, and I'm also a musician, I did a soundtrack for it of Judeo-Arabic and Iraqi repertoire. And within the Judeo-Arabic repertoire is secular and also some sacred songs. That's me.
Thank you. All right, I'm excited to hear more from all of you, especially as we kind of dig into the central question. Before we sort of dive into where this is going and questions of how we tell more of these stories, I wanted to sort of wear my philosopher hat for a second and ask the question, why? Why is it important? Why does it matter? Or maybe you think it doesn't, I don't know. But I assume you all think it's important to tell a more diverse range of Jewish stories. And you can, any of you can jump in if you have some thoughts on this. Why is it valuable? Why is it important?
It's very important. Thank you for the question. It's important because when we engage with comic books, it shapes very much our view of the world from a young age. And as we see right now, even in the world where you'd think people would understand Jews, there's very little, if any, understanding of Jewish people. And to only tell part of the Jewish story is to only give part of the information of who we are and why we're special and why we're worth not rallying against, or worse. So Jewish people are a people of faith, we're a people of God, and that's not reflected in very much of Jewish comic books, and it's a very important piece of who we are. So I'll just speak to that respect of it, that I think it's very important to bring God into our work and bring God into the world as Jewish people.
If I can just jump in there, I think also most places in the world still don't know what a Jew is, or they've never met a Jew, or any of that stuff. But they do get comic books. So I feel that comic books and the medium and media in general is an opportunity for people to learn more about Jewish people. Even Hawaii, like I remember, it's the 50th state. I grew up with a lot of kids who didn't know, anything about Judaism. And I've been to other countries like Thailand, and they couldn't even, some people couldn't even pronounce the word Jew. So I think that it kind of opens up this place where people can kind of observe and just learn more on their own through story, which is the best way to relate to people. So, yeah.
And if I could add,
Sure.
I think it's also really important to show diversity within our Jewish community to the Jewish community. I mean, there have always been Jews of color and Jews, global Jews, Jews of the queer community in our synagogues and around, but they have never been so visible, I think, as now. And so I think it's also important for other Jews to recognize within our midst, there's also a range of people, and that's the best way to even keep the community vibrant and growing, is to embrace everybody.
Exactly, and also to acknowledge that Jews are indigenous to the Middle East. I mean, my people were in what was Babylon, became Mesopotamia for more than 2,600 years after being taken from in 586 BC. So it's like taken hostage and taken away. So just to show that we also, our culture, I mean, in the Iraqi Jewish culture, it's very similar to the Muslim Jewish culture. There's so much more that we have in common that divides us. really.
Yeah, in mainstream media, they're definitely, the definition of what a Jew is in mainstream media certainly needs to be expanded, because it's true, like, people don't normally think of Jews as somewhere from the Middle East or having brown skin or any of those things. But, you know, because of the diaspora, Jews have been everywhere and in every country, and that's something that I think is worth proselytizing.
I mean, it sounds like everybody here certainly feels very strongly about expanding the palette of Jewish representation in the media that we work in, which leads to my next question, which is perhaps a little bit provocative. Why haven't we been doing this? Why is there so little? What are the barriers? What are the barriers that you perhaps have encountered in expanding this palette? Where do you think we're going wrong? Like, what's stopping this from just being the way Jewish stories are told?
Very provocative. Someone else want to take it?
Since I'm from two people who are not often seen in mainstream media, first of all, like, Native Americans are terribly underrepresented in mainstream media. So from my point of view, it took really a focused publishing house for my story to really become celebrated. I'm published through Heartdrum, which is a Native-focused imprint at HarperCollins, and they really made a push to have Native American stories told. And within the Native community, there's an awful lot of mixed identities. So I think it was their embracing the Native mixed people that really let my Jewish story be told, which I think is a really beautiful, that, you know, instead of having to come in that way, I was able to share my story to people who want to hear more from Indigenous American voices.
I think also for us, over 1 million Jews from Arab lands and the Middle East and North Africa and Iran became ethnically cleansed basically in the 1940s, and it was called the silent exodus because they kind of left without fuss and just settled where they could. Mostly some went to Israel, as we know. They lived in terrible conditions for years, and my family lived in tents in the desert until enough apartments were built. I grew up not really knowing about our history because my parents never spoke about it. You know, they talk about trauma. Maybe they didn't want to pass it on to me, but really until I started researching for my book did I find out some extraordinary stories of what had happened to them that no one ever talked about, really.
I think also part of the issue, and I'm sure you guys have all dealt with this, submitting things to mainstream publishers or Hollywood executives, right? Where it's just the lowest denominator thinking, like common denominator thinking, where they're like, wait, this is a story about like a left-handed Asian person who happens to be, no, like, you know, like, do we want, like, isn't this branded? Is this IP? What's the fan base? What's this gonna cost? Like, and they have real world business decisions that are behind that, where they're like, if this thing doesn't have X behind it, or they can't immediately make money, like, you know, they're not really interested in the message so much as like an immediate return. So there's like very little long-term thinking on the business side for it. And it's almost like the only way to do it is to do it independently or to find a small publisher and then build that audience. And then once you have that gold mine set up, they're in the business of like, and you know, I talked about this, like, you know, the Hollywood and these publishers, they're not in the business of helping you build a gold mine. They're in the business of buying gold mines. So once you have an audience already for X, then they'll come in and be your best friend. They'll come in like, you know, cocaine addicts or something. They're like, hey, what's going on? Can I get, you know, some of that audience you've got right there? And that's where you really have more leverage, whatever it is that you're trying to write about.
I'll give you a provocative answer. And I haven't experienced this in the comic book world, but as I mentioned, I've been a stand-up comedian for 20 years. And I wasn't observant when I started. And as I became observant, I did face a lot of discrimination from secular Jews that used to embrace me within the comedy world. And I'm not happy to report that, but there is a lot of anti-religious sentiment. I don't think that's a big mystery to people. And it's certainly in the arts. I made a film, which is a documentary stand-up film. I went and traced my Sephardic roots and went to Spain. I showed it around and shopped it around people. It wasn't overtly observant, but there were things about it, like me looking for kosher food in Barcelona. And that alone, when I brought it to Jewish film festivals, I got from a lot of Jewish film festivals the answer, just to paraphrase, it's too Jewish. So what they were really saying was, it's not secular. And so it really hurt me in that way. It hurt me not just in terms of the project, but it hurt me emotionally, because I'm a very Am Yisrael Chai kind of guy. So in terms of the comic book, I've been very fortunate in that the stand-up comedy label that I've been signed to for over a decade, that put out 2 of my albums, and the gentleman's here in the building with me, Dan Schlissel, has always been a great advocate of mine. And when I told him I want to start making comic books about my life, he said, I'm on board, and he opened up stand-up comics just for me. And he became my publisher. From that point, I caught the attention of Chabad, and they've since hired me to start making stories which are a hybrid of my life with Hasidic tales. This one's about the origin story of the Baal Shem Tov. So it was an unexpected way to get the message out, but it came from Hashem. So I didn't seek out to do books for Chabad, and Dan, I didn't say to him, please become a comic book publisher. But certainly it seems like that's where God is leading me with it. But as a stand-up comic, it really, I have stories, but I won't tell them, and there are names that I won't say, but big opportunities fell away when people found out that I was pro-God.
I'm curious if we could have a show of hands, how many of you folks in the audience are creators of some sort? Artists, writers? So a good bunch of folks in the audience. I wonder if we could sort of turn this question. I asked about barriers, I asked about the hardships, the hard challenges, and we certainly got elements of that. But for those folks out in the audience, and actually for each other also, I want to know, what works? What are some things that you've tried or things that you've done that have managed to kind of cut above those barriers, to borrow a term from a different issue? How'd you break through that glass ceiling to get stories told that were not necessarily part of what people were expecting, or that bucked some trends?
Well, I guess I'll hop in there. For me, there have been two ways to do it. One is you do an indie book, and you do it as best as you can, or a short story, wherever it is, and do it as well as you can, and get it out there. And the nice thing about doing independent stuff is that you really have full control, but that means all the burden is on you. For mainstream stuff, for like properties like He-Man or Superman or Marvel stuff, there's been kind of a time-tested way of doing it, which, comics historically is more Jewish than like the Diamond District here in Manhattan. It's insane. Like Manhattan is the Mesopotamia of the modern comic book industry, right? So, and there are many, many Jews, and a lot of them figured out very quickly, like, why don't we tell Jewish stories, and we don't have to say the characters are Jewish, but the themes are so Jewish, and the themes are, and I know that, and they basically would code the stories that way. Like, here's an insane story. I spoke to the original Bible writer of He-Man. Now, He-Man is this Aryan supermensch with like blue eyes and blonde hair. He has an iron cross strapped to his chest. But the guy who wrote the original Bible is a Jewish guy named Michael Halloran. We're having coffee, and he's this little old man, and he's telling me about how to, like, his tips on TV writing, which are like 60 years outdated. He's like, you want to work on shows where you get residuals. I'm like, dude, are you reading the news? There's a writer's strike for a reason, bro. He's like, I live off of residuals. I'm like, I know, those oil fields are gone. But he told me that the original Bible, parts of it were based on, like, for He-Man, were based on the story of the Maccabees. And I got that on, I had to record that because it was so unbelievable that this, like, super Aryan character had, like, Jewish roots, right? So, and all the characters are kind of like, a lot of the major characters like Batman and Superman, certainly, and they were basically, yeah, they were Jewish, obviously, but they never explicitly would say it with those characters. And I think that in some ways it's a drawback because we're not in the mainstream, yet our messaging, our morals are, right? But there, and there are other characters where they do try to put them in mainstream, but you're right. I think that there's a certain loss of universality where you overtly say that the character is this thing, because all of a sudden people who are not can't relate to it as much. And I do question what's more powerful, that we must say this character is Jewish, or that our moral message of what is good and what is evil and imbuing that in people is more powerful. And I'm kind of leaning towards the second, to be honest, personally. So that's my thoughts on it.
Well, I think I've been very lucky to have been very supported by the Jewish community along the way. I did a lot of mini comics and zines that I was able to get a little bit of funding for it, and then which was great, and then I could take it to Comic-Con, and I really just sat at a table in Artist Alley selling my comics, and it's really going from the ground up to kind of meet other creators, see how they're doing it, get a sense of what works for them. So in a way, I don't know if that is kind of traditional, felt traditional, because I was like, I'm at a Comic-Con, and but also kind of going from getting small grants from Jewish organizations really helped me and helped me find a network that I could rely on as I wanted to continue making the story more.
Well, I'm new to this game, this comics industry, but I found that in the UK, in any case, there's a really lovely community there who are really supportive. I mean, there's not many Jews who are doing this in the UK that I know of. So my story, family story, was really taken on board and really supported by things like the Comics Lakes Festival. I don't know if you know LICAF, and lots of other festivals too. And it seems like not just the theme of like having this nostalgia for a home that you've never been to. There's even a word for it in Finnish, kaukukaipu, and it's one of those untranslatable words that just means that you feel this immense heart sickness, homesickness and heart sickness for a place that you've only ever heard about. And a lot of people who are first or second generation born feel the same. And it's like their families come from elsewhere, whether they were made refugees or they're economic migrants. It's like this feeling of not belonging, but wanting to belong somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what's worked mostly is the DIY approach. I have been putting out podcasts, and based on my podcast following, a lot of people will pick up the books, and it's also sort of a way the two feed into each other, and stand-up as well. When I do stand-up shows, I bring my books as merch now. So after the show, people come out and they're like, you're selling comic books? So that's usually pretty unique to them, because what other stand-up comic sells comic books about themselves after the show? So they usually sell pretty well like that. And then I'll just go and get tables at LA Comic-Con or other small conventions, and people buy them there, and hopefully people will buy them here. Some people have, but I expect every one of you. And so that's what I've been doing.
Great. I want to pick up a little bit on a direction that Carol started to go, that I think also connects, it weaves into some of what Josh was saying, and certainly to Emily's book in a way, and to some of Daniel's content. Carol, you were describing a concept for which there is a word, was it in Finnish?
Yes, it's
Okay.
finished, yes.
And to me, that sort of sparked this idea that, all right, you're writing a Jewish story. You're writing a Jewish story that is not, you're not, spoon-feeding the audience what they're expecting when they're expecting a Jewish story. You're giving them something very, very different. But within that story, there's also a universality. There is something very human. There is an experience that, there are words for it in other languages. It's something that other cultures are familiar with. And so my question to all of you, sort of jumping off of that, is how much, when you're setting out to write something, how much do you see yourself writing something personal and hoping that somewhere in it there is something that other people will relate to, versus starting with a broad universal idea and hoping that somewhere within that idea there is something specific to you and to your background and to your heritage and culture that you can use to express it? Now, where is your starting point? Is it the specific and personal, or is it the broad idea? And how do those two interact, and how do you use that to then communicate with a broader audience?
Well, for me, it's story first, for sure. All I care about when I'm sitting down is telling a story that really counts. And to me, I've thought a lot about, and I'm sure all of you have, what really makes a good story, and what am I really giving the reader? And for me, my goal is to emotionally move the reader and to give them something worthwhile. So that means, laughing, making them feel something, having new ideas, clever dialogue. And once I come up with what I feel is a strong enough story, everything else arms that, basically. I connect all these things, and including messaging, right? Because the whole story, you're really trying to give them something that, don't be racist or something like that, no matter how simple it is, and wrap everything around that, where they can, for example, when I was in Hebrew school, one of the best things I ever learned was so simple. My Hebrew school teacher, who told me to sheket all the time, which means shut up in Hebrew, was, she told me that if something good happens to someone don't be jealous of them. Be happy for them. And I learned that at the perfect age. And that's the perfect lesson if you work in entertainment, I feel, right? Because you need to be happy for people when good things happen to them. And I feel so for me, when I try to tell a story, I try to tell something worthwhile that the reader's gonna get. And I try to tell as great a story as I can, and everything else kind of arms that polemic, whatever that is, that core message. And that's how I usually do it. And the thing is, for storytellers, our goal, to me, generationally, it's just to remind people of the morals and lessons that count in life, and they have to be repeated every 10 years constantly, as we're seeing right now in the news, right? So to me, that's how I go about it anyway.
I would agree with Josh. Largely, story first. I think where we differ is I like to leave people with nothing when they read my books.
Very Seinfeld-esque.
But I think, I never go into the book. I mean, it's different when I do the books for Chabad, where it's they give me a Hasidic tale, and then I want to tell it through my lens. But when I'm writing my books about my life, I just want to, I'm thinking about stories from my life that would be, good material for at least a storytelling show, if not a piece of stand-up. And then I try and just tell them as accurately as possible. Any messaging within that is really just a byproduct of the story. Mm-hmm. It's never I want to insert in this secret subliminal message. So I just want to produce the very best story that I possibly can to give the reader something great. Because so much inspiration, certainly in my life, came out of reading comic books as a kid. It's funny, I got to know Woody Allen when I was younger, and I asked him his biggest influence. You'd never guess what he said. Archie. He said Archie was the thing that made him, so the inspiration that people take from comic books is huge, and it's a big responsibility. You want to put out good things into the world, inspiring things. But my feeling is, don't force the inspiration. It should be inspiring because it's good, it's great, because it's a great piece of storytelling. not because, you've calculated that I will inspire the world in this way,
So if we're trying to inspire people, if we're trying to tell good stories, and starting from that, but, in this panel, part of what we're grappling with is this idea that there is a certain framework of Jewish narrative that is missing from the popular discourse, or that is underrepresented in the popular discourse. If we're leading with story, how do we make sure that this extra stuff is included? How do we make sure that we have these diverse characters? Because I guess the question is, if we lead with story, do we run the risk of forgetting that there's this extra responsibility to try to engage with?
I do not lead with story. Perhaps, I'm a narcissist, I don't know. But I really I knew growing up mixed, not being just Jewish, which so many of us are, I knew there had to be other people who felt a sort of isolation when they were sitting at Hebrew school or synagogue. I knew there were other people. And I think I really started off exploring that. And it was really an internal process to sort of figure out why am I feeling this way? Why do I not feel comfortable in the synagogue? How come people like me are not represented in the stories that we see? And I think I really led from that. It did not make a successful graphic novel that was going to get sold by HarperCollins. But that is the process. That's where the process.
So you lead with
began.
character. You lead with character.
Yeah, so I say I
You lead with character. Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Most of the time I feel uncomfortable in a synagogue is because the seats are too small. Something to explore.
I rarely
Not for
understand what's
you.
going on.
Well, my responsibility was to my family. Once they started telling me their stories, I felt I had to kind of, do the best that I could to my best abilities to. And it kind of wrote itself. It starts off with, details of coexistence and everything, and then you see the kind of slow creep of anti-Semitism and Arab nationalism, and then the inevitable happens. But it was trying to get that story, let them speak, let them have their words, because like I said, who knows about these stories? Well, we don't know everything. And there's this thing called, it's horrible, it's called challenging the Ashkenormativity. Challenging the Ashkenormative, which some of my more militant Mizrahi friends like to say. I want to say complimenting the Ashkenormative, because, there's all these wonderful stories we need to hear. And the follow-up book that I have is called Burma by Accordion. And it's about, again, my family in Myanmar, in Burma. There were a bunch of Jews that left Iraq as merchants. Some of them went to India. My father's cousins ended up in Burma. So there's that whole other story of another Jewish community we don't know much about.
I just want to add one more thing. Very honored that my parents and my brother are here today. My dad spent so much of his life as a photojournalist traveling to different obscure Jewish communities around the globe and writing about them and photographing them for every major publication. And I definitely think a lot of that influenced me as well in trying to bring forward these different kind of Jewish identities, certainly with my film that I did, to sort of put something else out there that's not, we have a lot of, and it's important, but we have a lot of content on the Holocaust. I didn't see too much on the Inquisition, and I wanted to do something like that. And a lot of that is influenced by my dad's work, because he spent so much of his life exposing Jewish communities people knew nothing about, like Azerbaijan, and he traveled to Ethiopia and all kinds of amazing places and photographed communities that many of them no longer exist there. They've been liquidated from that area and brought to Israel or wherever, and so I think that informs a lot of my motivation as well.
For me, I feel like I have this kind of almost naive optimism, because I grew up in Hawaii, which is first off paradise, and the racism dynamic in Hawaii is completely different than in the mainland. First off, we watch all this TV from the mainland, and they, especially in the 90s, racism was completely washed out. So I'm like, oh, we got it together. Racism's old news, right? But the other thing also is that, in Hawaii, you know, like people were more racist to white people than to like locals, and it's also one of the most diverse mixed places in the world. Like I didn't experience virtually zero anti-Semitism growing up. So to me, like that sort of optimism and possibility, I feel like is probably more imbued in my stories. But to tell you before, I don't think I'm trying to like telegraph one specific message so much as, you know, like to brainwash the reader or anything like that. I think I'm more interested in giving them something worthwhile or moving them, you know? Like it's almost like when you were a kid and you found that one great issue of X and it was so good and you needed it in that moment, you almost want to like hold on to it. And that's kind of the goal I think I'm really going for when I write something, you know?
I get that for sure. You also totally inspired me more than ever now to want to move to Hawaii.
Guys, I'm just saying, New Zealand, Hawaii, when it really hits the fan, let's get our tickets. So anyway.
So great weather, great beaches, no anti-Semitism. Hawaii, folks.
But how many more shuls than Jews will we need in order to be happy there? I don't know. All right, this conversation has been going very well. We have about 13 or so minutes left. And I wanted to give an opportunity for folks in the audience to ask some questions. We have a microphone over there in one corner, which you're welcome to line up at. And well, looks like we have one potential question right there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Isn't part of the problem right now in society in general is the identity politics? Because there are certain groups the society favors, and certain groups it doesn't. And unfortunately for us, you know, we and Native Americans and some other groups don't fall into the group that, you know, promoted and considered, you know, the in-group, the one that should be treated well and all that. We're not considered victims. We're not considered, and that's why I think like there's a lot of problems. That's why it's harder, I think, for Jewish creators and Native American creators to get their stuff out than somebody who's from LGBT or whatever groups, because they are considered, you know, this is a group that's supposed to be more cared about. I mean, you said it about we have to choose. We just have to choose between promoting our message or promoting ourselves, our identity. We have to have one or the other. Most other groups don't have to make that choice. You know, I mean, if you ask like African Americans, nobody will ask that question because they can promote, it comes all together.
Well,
and the same thing with many other groups.
But
So I think this brings up a fair question to sort of include in this discussion, which is, you know, we're talking about broadening the depiction of Jews to include a broader range of Jews and Jewishness, but we're talking about this in the context of a time when identity figures into a lot of conversations about society and culture. So I guess if our panelists could reflect a bit on that, you know, what's the interaction between identity in the sort of pop cultural sense and this question of defining and redefining and expanding or broadening the identity that we reflect to the world?
Well, really quick, I think it's case by case, right? So if you're like, and there are different, the thing is, what's great about media is there's so many different examples, like every movie or book or comic or story is kind of a test run of some of these simulations, right? So for example, if you're gonna do a story about slavery, right? Obviously it has a certain tone, but if you're gonna, you know, and it's about that part of Black history, right? But if you're gonna do a story of, say...
Well, you just said it. Slavery, everybody immediately associates slavery with Black history, but slavery used to be across the board. Everybody enslaved everybody
For sure.
else.
Well, there could be different movies. Sure. So if you're going to do
certain
slavery in the
countries.
10 Commandments, or if you're going to do slavery in, say, you know, 12 Years a Slave, but versus something like, what if you wanted to do a movie about, you know, cops in Beverly Hills and Eddie Murphy is going to be the main cop? It's like, there are different ways of doing it. Like, that movie didn't go around parading like, oh, we casted a black guy as the main guy, look, look, look. No, it was just a great movie and the main character is black. So there are different ways of doing it. For me, I think that's really cool, where let's just say we made a movie where one of the main characters was a Native American Jewish girl, and that was like a part of it, and she was on an FBI case trying to take something down. You know, I do PR for her, by the way, for acting. But I think you get what I'm saying in terms of like, I think there's a cool way of doing it, and that, yeah, you can write that into the identity, but the story is really about something else, right?
You just made my point for me. They would do that for African American, but they would not do that.
Why not? I think they could still do that.
For Native American
but,
Jewish
no,
girl, but you don't see it. The point is that doesn't exist.
Yes, it does.
Well, I
There
mean,
are
it
some
exists
independent
okay,
movies.
but in
Well, I
general,
think it can exist.
But in general,
I
it
think-
can, but it doesn't.
Right. No, there are certain, I'd have to think of some examples. I mean, Harold and Kumar go to White Castle. There's an Indian guy and an Asian guy who are just getting cheeseburgers. I feel like that's the best, to me anyway, that's the best way to really promote diversity of what, you know, rather than, for example, Marvel, who I love Marvel comics, but I'm a little critical of the way they did this book called Marvel Voices, where they go, look, it's the diverse book. We're immediately going to create a ghetto where we're going to put all the diverse authors, and look, we made a diverse book because we're being diverse. They're all in the diverse book. Why don't you just give the Asian guy Spider-Man and you give that the black girl to write something else, and they just write their stories? Why did you have to do that? Because they're politicizing it.
Yeah.
So I think politicization is what's dangerous. I
Yeah.
think what's more interesting is just showing that we're all made of the same stuff.
Yeah.
That's better. You know?
I agree. I agree.
All right,
Thank you.
It looks like we've got a whole bunch of questions.
Well, I think this gentleman was waiting first.
Well, no, he's there to hand the microphone to people.
So you was waiting first.
All right. I was just wondering, which genre do you think could use more Jewish characters?
Well, all of them.
Romance.
All of them?
All of them.
No, I think romance. Don't you
And
think?
I think I mean, just speaking for myself, because a lot of the writing that I do is specifically genre writing. You know, I've written a swashbuckler, I've written a globe-trotting adventure story, a sci-fi novel. To me, the question is not so much more Jewish characters, it's a question of more diverse and authentic Jewish characters. We do see Jewish characters on screen, on film, on television. We do see Jewish characters in comics on occasion. They are just almost all kind of the same very narrow sliver of Jewish. And so it's not so much more Jews, it's about more types of Jews, more shades, more colors, more diversity of Jews. And I think just to return to that question of the way identity politics, for lack of a better term, has played out, is that with all sorts of types of people, it has sort of narrowed definitions. And so I think within the Jewish world, it's just particularly narrow. And that's part of where the stories that are represented by the creators here really start to open that up. And not just the stories, but the creators themselves, as we heard from their backgrounds. There is not a single person on this panel, myself included, who fits the narrow mold of what a pop culture Jewish character looks like. And I think
I've never fit a narrow mold.
Pardon?
I'm just saying.
Fair.
Fair enough.
So, exactly. That's the name of his series, by the way.
Thank you.
And now I've completely lost my train of
I'm
thought.
sorry, Arnon. It's all right. I'll just tell you a little anecdote to go along with what you were saying. That it kind of really speaks to the name of this panel. The film I was telling you I've been promoting, Reconquistador, where I go to Spain and trace my Sephardic roots and do stand-up. I wound up doing a series of Jewish podcasts to promote it. And one of the biggest Jewish podcasts, I cannot name and tell you the story, is hosted by 2 Syrian Jews. And when I went in there, the first thing they told me is, don't tell or allude to the fact that we're Syrian Jews at all throughout the podcast. And I said, why? What are you, Batman or something? What are you, you know, what's this secret identity? They said, no. We originally couldn't get anywhere with our podcast as Sephardim, and because of Ashkenormativity, we present ourselves on the podcast. We don't put any pictures of ourselves. We don't use our real names. And we say we're Ashkenaz, and the podcast took off, and it's one of the biggest ones now. I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm going to bring it up right away." No, but I was shocked. But you know, there's so much prejudice out there, apparently, even just towards Sephardim. So.
Hi, my name is Samson Miller. I'm an author of Jewish sci-fi and fantasy, and my question sort of relates to the previous one, and I'm just wondering, how do we combat I feel like, average American media consumers' assumption of what a Jew is? Because I feel like most people, when they think of a Jew or see a Jewish character in a movie, TV show, comic book, whatever, they think of kind of a funny Seth Rogen type who likes bagels, and also Hanukkah is the Jewish version of Christmas. So I'm wondering, how do we combat that, and how do we show the rest of the world that there's more to Judaism than just that, and there are also so many different cultures and subcultures of Judaism, different types of Jews. How do we get that into the mainstream?
Do more books. I'd love to see something by an Azerbaijani Jew. Imagine the story they would tell, or someone from Afghanistan.
Yeah, dude, you're a science fiction writer. Why don't you put those, them in space? No. But
My first book's about that.
Right. No, but all joke kidding aside, like the way you do it is you write those books and you create those books, just like Carol said. You put out those books and you are empowered. Like on one hand, it's like, okay, oh my gosh, the sweet money of like the 80s and 90s in Hollywood, where you could like pitch an idea and get a bunch of money for it and they don't even make it. That's gone. But this era is really powerful because you can see through the thing. So really the power is yours in the sense that like you can write those stories and do those stories and make those creative decisions. But honestly, just listening to everyone talk, I think it's really two things that we've been talking about the whole time, which is story, which is really important, and then character, and casting these sorts of characters, and then the way we choose as creatives to portray those characters. The power is really in our hands to do it in the way we see fit and we think does it best. And hopefully we do something compelling enough that make people care, readers care.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If I may jump in with a bit of an anecdote of my own, I don't know if I'm allowed as the moderator, but I'm the moderator,
sure.
So I can make up my
We
own
give you
rules.
permission.
A bunch of years ago, I wrote a sci-fi feature, a post-apocalyptic sci-fi adventure, a Jewish post-apocalyptic sci-fi adventure. When I pitched it around Hollywood, I referred to it as Moses Meets Mad Max. It's called Wayfarers. It's a lot of fun. And companies, started taking an interest. There was a producer who was trying to, take it around. He got it to a French production company that had studios in Morocco, and we were talking about filming the thing. And they had exactly one note on this screenplay. They said, "This is great. It's a lot of fun. The characters are great. The story is great. But can you make it less Jewish? Or could you make it even not Jewish at all?" And it's a story about Jewish refugees in a post-apocalyptic future who are fleeing persecution and trying to hold on to the last sliver of their identity. And so I said, no, because clearly they hadn't read the script. And of course the project fizzled and sat in a drawer for a while. And I was very discouraged by that because I thought, well, I mean, I didn't write a heavily Jewish story. I wrote a grand high-octane diesel punk adventure that would be just lots and lots of fun. And the characters happen to be Jewish, and there's some Jewy stuff kind of connected to it, but like nobody complained that Star Wars was too Jedi. Anyway, I came up a bunch of years later with another idea for a movie, a little short film about Jewish pirates. And to me, that project, the big question, the big test of that project was, can I smuggle this Jewishness into the mainstream? Can I make this relevant and resonant in a broader world? And I figured, this is a pirate story. This is a story about a stowaway. It's a story about a refugee. The film was called The Pirate Captain Toledano. It ended up screening in 50 film festivals all over the world. Only about 5 or 6 of those were Jewish film festivals. And it screened in places like Tetovo, Macedonia, in, I believe it was Fez, Morocco, in a lot of places that used to have really big Jewish communities that didn't have any anymore, include also in some places that never had any Jewish communities at all, which to me felt like confirmation that you can tell a Jewish story that will play, that will resonate far beyond the Jewish world. And I think that, like Josh was saying, it's about telling a good story. It's about finding a way to make the Jewishness relevant to the story in the way that, you know, Jedi is relevant to Star Wars. You can't have Star Wars without Jedi, and that's totally okay. And there are ways to tell Jewish stories like that also. And so I've been using that as my, you know, when I get pushback for a story being too Jewish, I say, well, no, look, I demonstrated that I can tell a Jewish story that a broader audience finds compelling. It's not impossible. It can be done. The more of us take that risk, and again, like Josh was saying, because we are now in this 21st century world where we can create our own content much more easily than used to be the case. You know, we can create short films and get them out there. We can even create independent comics and get them out there. In fact, Wayfarers, that post-apocalyptic sci-fi film that never got off the ground, I just recently finished rewriting that as a novel. It's available on Amazon as a serialized novel. It's coming out a chapter every Monday. We can do that now. And as long as we remember that we are not writing for a narrow sliver of the world, we are writing for a broad audience. And we are writing, you know, a Jewish Star Wars, for example. We are writing something that is meant to transcend our immediate circle, and at the same time represent it honestly and proudly. I think we will find that some of us manage to do that. Some of us manage to cross that barrier. And the more that happens, the easier it'll be for the rest of us to be able to pitch those types of projects to the decision makers and to get more of those types of stories off the ground. So I am very glad that you're writing Jewish sci-fi. I hope to read it someday.
Thank you.
See, how are we doing time-wise? Pardon? Yeah, they want us to wrap up, yes.
One more?
Is it really quick? Let's do
Oh,
one.
yeah.
Can we do them rapid fire, the two
quick.
people who are waiting?
Quick and simple. So my name is Richard McBee. I'm an artist. I'm a writer, specialist in Jewish art. I think all of you are amazing creators and very courageous in terms of making this kind of art. But I have one question. I don't have to tell you what you have done. It's curious what I'm not seeing in your repertoire. I'm not seeing what we are, i.e., I'm not seeing Torah, I'm not seeing Gemara, I'm not seeing Midrash. Now, I'm certain some of it is hidden in there, but that is what we as a people are. Okay, good. This is what we are as a
Jordan
people.
Gorfinkel, you should go check out his books. He's exactly what you're talking about. That is totally represented in his books right out there on that floor.
And I've
I appreciate where you're coming from.
I have certainly seen that.
Yeah.
But this as a subject matter overtly is, first of all, it also happens to create Western civilization. So it's not Jewish narrow, it's Jewish universal. So I guess my question was, I just would like to see more of that overtly in your brief.
The climax of my pirate film is the pirate captain on a pirate ship reciting Kiddush.
You got to read the books first.
Yeah, man, you didn't read any of the books, bro.
But make
Not
make
available
one.
for sale.
Make the book that you want that you're talking about.
First of all, I certainly am.
But in the meantime,
That's why
buy all of our books and take inspiration
Can I please just
from
say-
whatever you're not seeing there to put in your book.
Beyond my book also, it does include some Torah between the rabbi and the girl protagonist. They sit and learn together. And the point is to go beyond the creation of Western civilization and to point out that we are, a world civilization. And she actually draws some comparisons between her indigenous culture and the Torah. So I also just wanted to push back about that as well. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, man.
If you want to ask the question afterwards, I'm happy to answer.
All right, well, we are told we've got to wrap up. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, guys.
And
Thank you, Arnon.
we'll see you outside.